just going to do a really brief overview of what we chatted about. But before we get into all of that, I just wanted to do a land acknowledgement. So I am located on the traditional territories of the Niitsitapi, the Blackfoot people, and the people of Treaty 7, which includes the Siksika, the Piikani, the Kainai, the Tsuut'ina, and the Stoney Nakoda. So I work on the land where the Bow River meets the Elbow River, and the traditional Blackfoot name for this place is Mohkinstsis, which we now call the city of Calgary. And Mohkinstsis is also home to the Métis Nation Region 3. Oh, great. So again, for those that weren't at the last session, my name is Taylor McPeak. My pronouns are she, her. My email is just up on the screen there, but it is tmcpeak@mtroyal.ca. And then I just linked the library copyright libguide, where you can find all sorts of copyright information, particularly pertaining to MRU, but there's some general stuff there as well. All right, so yeah, I also work, again, for those that weren't here last time, I also work at Mount Royal University. I am the copyright advisor there, and I am here right now. Okay, so I don't think I talk about any information that could be perceived as legal advice in this particular version or part 2 of the session, but let me just say the advice information, any opinions in these slides and during my presentation are not intended to constitute, nor do they replace legal advice, and do not create an attorney-client relationship. So please consult with a lawyer for any legal matters. This is all just, professional opinion, like information. So really quickly, this is just what we're going to go over. So we're going to do just a super brief recap of the previous session. I'm going to be specifically going through Copyright Doe. So this was the game along with a few other games that I talked about at the last session. I'm going to be doing kind of an in-depth exploration of really the how I found out about it, the adaptation process, the testing process, the development process, and finally the launch of it and things I've learned ultimately from this whole experience and kind of how it's inspired me to keep pursuing this gamification. And then of course at the end we'll have time for questions as well as we're going through this. Okay. So again, for those who weren't at the previous session, just really quickly, we touched on some ideas of copyright anxiety. So this is a term that basically describes the resulting frustrations and negative emotions that people might have when they navigate copyright considerations. There's a lot of baggage, so to speak, that comes with copyright. And so this can be in the form of anxiety or fear or confusion. And this term and this feeling you'll see very commonly in any place where you're working with copyright material quite frequently. And then the other question we asked and discussed is, what is copyright literacy? So copyright literacy is the ability to identify copyright protected materials and then navigate these spaces by which you can use these materials, how to obtain permissions, recognizing infringement, and then understanding the ethical use of copyright information and copyright materials. So the purpose of copyright literacy is really, of course, just to have an understanding of what copyright is. And then for the rest of the talk, we really just talked about ways by which we can achieve copyright literacy, how we can both for ourselves and then if we are in teaching positions, how can we help the people around us? And one of those techniques or methods that I have employed is gamification. So this is essentially, as exactly how it sounds, you are applying a game-based technique in a non-game context, and then you are doing basically an in-depth simulation of a real-life scenario. So, to put in much simpler terms, you are learning by playing. And of course, as I talked about in the last session, this really lowers barriers to complex topics, particularly something like copyright law, which you would, when you learn about these things, it's often and can be dry, and hopefully through the gamification process, you can make it a bit more engaging, a bit more interactive, and a bit more discussion focused, which can again prompt a lot of like really interesting questions and really interesting comments and perceptions from people in your audience. All right, so we're going to go through Copyright Dough, again, the game I talked about last time, but we're going to kind of talk about it in a more how the process of creating this game and implementing it at my institution went. So right off the hop, Copyright Dough, just a really quick recap from last time, the original game was developed by two I believe they were scholarly communications. I can't remember if they worked in the library at University of Essex, but the two researchers are Hannah Pyman and Katrine Sensbo. They are from the UK. One of them no longer works at the University of Essex, but when they created this game, they both worked there. And they developed this game called Copyright Dough that was bringing fun and Play-Doh into complex topic like copyright. And so they had a number of materials that they developed for this. You would play with Play-Doh, and then essentially, again, you would kind of prompt a lot of discussions. So really quickly, just to go through the overview, really brief overview. I won't go into as much as in depth as I did last time because it will kind of come up as I talk about the development process. But essentially, the game is split into two phases. Phase one is the building phase or the creation phase, where your participants who are grouped into various roles will create their sculpture, their Play-Doh sculpture. Certain people with certain roles will have a specific task that they are intended to do, such as the researcher card here on the screen. So everyone does their task, and then once that creation phase is done, now we move into phase two, which is the discussion phase. And so it is there that everyone in the room will do their task too, and then it will go from person to person in the space. They will basically say what they have done, whether they've been prompted to copy a sculpture without giving credit, or they did give credit, or they decided to go with something else. There's a number of different tasks that they would have had to complete. So from there, once the person has kind of given their argument as to what prompted their creation, the group will then vote whether it's okay or not okay in terms of copyright. And so they'll have those voting cards, as you can see on the right of the screen. And then the whole purpose of this is, again, to promote this discussion amongst your participants. So if you are facilitating this particular workshop, as the facilitator, it's very important to only really address kind of fact-checked type of questions, and not to provide as much in depth for the discussion, because really the discussion is meant to be with the people that are playing, and you're just there to kind of guide and help support conversation, and answer any sort of clarification questions. All right, so that's a general overview of the flow of the game. And so I had originally found this game. I'm part of a listserv for UK copyright literacy. I had linked it out last time, but if you look up UK copyright literacy, they have an entire website that has a lot of really great resources. And they also have a blog that goes out. I'm not sure what their timeline's like. I think they have blog posts that come out once a month or something like that. And one of their blog posts had popped into my email, and it basically was talking about Copyright Dough, where the two researchers, Hannah and Katrine, had published about this particular game. They had put up the resources on Figshare under an open license for people to adapt and to share widely. And so I thought, why not? I was relatively new to my current position. I've been with MRU for just over 2 years now. And at the time when I was thinking about this, I was relatively new, so I was pretty confident, was just, trying something arguably a bit out of the box. And I got to work on the adaptation of this. So the reason I needed to adapt it most of it anyways, was that on the left-hand side here is this information sheet. So this information sheet essentially goes through various exceptions to the Copyright Act. And of course, since the original researchers slash developers were from the UK, their laws are slightly different than ours. And so they look at fair dealing in a slightly different way. They apply the law in a slightly different way. And so this was definitely where the most adaptation occurred, where essentially I had to strip all the UK law and then put in the Canadian law here. So this was definitely the one that underwent the most adaptation. Aside from that, the only other real major adaptation, let me just see if I have it here. Yeah, so I talked about that adaptation phase. So the only other major adaptation was some of the language on some of the cards, which I will talk about on the next slide here. Let me just go here. So the next kind of adaptation slash changes came after the testing phase. So once I had all these materials printed out, and so this is definitely dependent on the space you're in. In my library, we are able to print in color and everything. We also have a service on campus that will do printing for us as well. I will say, if you are interested in the link to these materials after this workshop, there are printing instructions. But as I've been telling everyone who's emailed me about it, the printing instructions seem to be potentially printer dependent, because I certainly went through some trial and error with ensuring that the cards would print front to back properly. So definitely, do some test printing first before you kind of print all of it, just to make sure you have the kind of orientation correct. That was I think definitely my biggest bump as far as the development or the printing slash organizing of the materials. But aside from that, once you have that down, it's really easy. That you can easily cut them out. If you have a laminator on site, it also is helpful just to have the longevity of the game. So I highly recommend. You can also buy, for those that are familiar with board and card games and stuff, you can also buy little card slips. So if you don't have a laminator, you can slip each individual card into this little plastic pouch, basically. So there are lots of different options out there. This was just what I had available for me on my campus. So after all of that, printing of materials, and just ensuring that all of that made sense, and then I was able to have all of those together. I did my first test run of the game, and so I wanted to ensure that it made sense in a real life scenario. Of course, it can only, when you're reading something, it can only go so far. You need to see it acted out and played out. And so I did a call at my own library here, where I basically asked for a number of volunteers. I believe at the time I had asked for 10 volunteers to come do this workshop. We would basically do the workshop as is, and then afterwards I had sent out a survey to which they provided their feedback. I got a lot of really good in-person feedback too, and that helped really shape the next iteration of the game. So that was where the kind of next adaptation point really came into play, because at the time when I did the first iteration or the testing phase, I had not replaced the UK vocabulary. So there were certain slang terms here and there. There was also just more of a focus on like European topics. If I just go back here, even here, up here for the researcher, one of the prompts was that you're a historian researching the Tudors. There's nothing particularly wrong with that, but there was a lot of very England focused history or again language, etc. So I tried to make mine broader. I tried to make it a bit more familiar to people from North America, and ultimately just gonna go back here, and ultimately that kind of helped have a better understanding of the cards. I think one of the big things that people were hung up on, which I don't have the card of it right now, but there was a line. So on one of your roll cards, this one doesn't have it, but on one of your roll cards, it will have basically a vacation spot. And so the slang used was holiday. And so essentially it'd be like your interest, your guilty pleasure, and your holiday. And it's supposed to be your favorite vacation spot. But for some people, they were thinking holiday as in, Easter or Thanksgiving or Christmas or whatever. That's kind of what they were associating it to. So there was just little nitpicky things like that. The Canadian version has had that updated. Obviously, if you are going to use the Canadian version, you can adapt them to whatever you want. I just, again, tried to broaden and make it a bit more focused on MRU. So this would also include, some of these researcher or different other role cards. It would include specific subjects that were covered here at our institution. And so it made it a bit more personal to this institution specifically. Okay. I also afterwards, when I had the first kind of test run of the game, I quite literally just started the game. I didn't give any, we went through the instructions for the game, but I didn't really give any context about copyright itself. And so this was one of the other big changes, was I realized after the fact that I had a very diverse audience who had, some people knew more about copyright, some people knew less. And so afterwards, I added a brief 5 to 10 minutes overview of what copyright is. And it just basically goes through, here's the law, here's public domain, here's kind of the kind of major points that will be brought up in the game. So this helps, again, just put people into the thought process that or put people into the minds of where they should be for the game, and then just adds a bit more context as to what the discussion points can be around. And so I found that this was quite helpful as well. As far as the audience was considered, this was something that has definitely been an evolving process, because at first I basically would just have it as a public workshop. So at Mount Royal University Library, essentially we have a variety of different types of workshops, but we have public ones that are just on our website. Anyone can sign up and come join. So there wasn't really a target per se. It was just kind of, hey, there's this new thing that has started. Let's see how it works out. And so at first, I think the first one was quite successful, but after that, public workshops are tricky unless you have a very, very targeted marketing plan, strategy, etc. It can be difficult to bring in people for workshops, even if you put it in the phrase Play-Doh. Sometimes it doesn't always incentivize people enough to sign up for it. So that I also, in that same breath, I also tried targeting students and faculty separately. So I had a copyright dough for students, I had a copyright dough for faculty. Again, that wasn't necessarily the best approach in my experience. But where I did find it very helpful is when you have a specific group, like a department or a group of people on campus that would benefit from something like this. Asking them or have it tied to a professional development type of situation can be very, very helpful. I also attempted, and I've done it twice, I've also attempted to do it in the classroom. So I teach as a contract instructor during the winter semester here at MRU, and my class that I teach is about ethics and law. And so it did fit definitely within the learning objectives of the course, but it is definitely tricky to do this particular game in a large group. So one, I had to make more materials for it. Two, if you have about 20 plus people, your conversations could kind of go off somewhere that might not be related. For the most part, my particular students managed to keep on task, but sometimes it would kind of go off to the fringes and they would go down rabbit holes, etc. But It's tricky. So I definitely, as far as size goes, I definitely recommend no more than 12. That was, at least in my experience, just because, again, I find when you have a smaller group of people, you can definitely have a more engaging, interactive conversation. Everyone has a chance to chat or has a chance to engage and be part of it. You also need enough people to fill enough roles. So you couldn't really do this game with 2 people. You would need, I believe, about a minimum of 4. So there is kind of that sweet spot between 4 and 12, which can be tricky if you have a game that is dependent upon the number of people to make it happen. So that's why I believe a targeted professional development specific group is really, really helpful if you're going to bring this game to anyone, because then you're not, if you don't get enough people, you're not having to reschedule, etc. I believe I might have covered some of these things, but here's a few different lessons learned that came out of this experience. So I've hosted it in a number of different ways, and I am going to be hosting another one this year. But again, my biggest thing for me is I would really like to be tied to professional development within specific departments. Again, at least at my institution. So as I mentioned, diverse groups leads to a number of really different and fun conversations. So it can, again, be very, very interesting because you're getting perspectives from people that you may not hear that perspective very often. For example, I had 2 participants that came from our marketing and communications team on campus. So I got to hear kind of the more commercial side, which was very, very interesting. If this is something where you have a really solid marketing plan and you have a lot of engagement, a lot of excitement around it, you can definitely, of course, host several of these public workshops if that's the route that you wanted to go. But point 1 and point 2, or sorry, point 2 and point 3 really kind of tie together, where you can have a lot of course if you get the word out. So that's something I learned. I did try to do a lot, but then, I would have some people come to one and then nobody come to the other. And so it was always this kind of constant balancing act of when to have them, and who to target. So while I did say I did try the full game with my own class of about 23 or 24 students, there are smaller or shorter versions of the game that you can develop. So I managed over time, I came up with an iteration, and it's not even really related to the game itself, but essentially just used Play-Doh just in a larger group where everyone got to build a sculpture. And then we talked about the conditions for copyright protection within the sculpture they built. So it's not completely related to copyright dough, but it was at least still using the same materials, and it was much better suited for a larger group where the game may not work as well. On just a really quick practical note, be wary of Play-Doh drying out. It dries out faster than you think sometimes. And so while I only bought a box of about, I think it's 36 cans, and at the time when I bought it on Amazon, it was about $40, maybe a little less. Just be prepared budget wise. You would need to probably get more potentially every year. It depends on where you're living. It depends on the air quality, of course, and how many times those jars are being opened. Also, another big thing, and this is in the tips and tricks and lessons within the resources that I can share as well, but I just want to say it out loud. Ensure you have an alternative option to Play-Doh. So for anyone that is allergic to Play-Doh, just ensure there's something else. You can get non-allergenic Play-Doh. You can also just have them write or draw on a piece of paper. There's many different alternatives, but just ensuring that you have an alternative available for someone that might not be able to touch it. And usually when I would go into the space, I would always just say aloud, if you aren't able to touch this, please let me know. We'll find an alternative for you, etc. And then finally, again, this is just really my my own preference and really what my goal will be this year when using Copyright Dough and for the future is, again, to bring it into very specific spaces for very specific audiences as a teaching tool. So, this kind of goes without saying, but when you have a group of people that actually care about this particular topic and it's relevant to what they're doing, there is going to be, of course, that higher engagement overall. Okay, I believe I'm at time, but that is all I have for you. So I'm happy to take any questions that anyone has.
Taylor, thank you once again for doing part 2. We brought you back by popular demand.
Oh, that's great.
Tell us a little bit more about the script cards, the game. We love you give us the full picture and marketing and even the Play-Doh drying up, and the budget, like that's all relevant. Yes, please tell us a little bit about actual dynamics. What's a roll card? What's a license card? What's a tax card? What's a voting card like?
Okay.
And how does it work, like these information sheet?
Yes, I'm going to briefly take off my headset and just grab the rest of the cards here because I can show the ones that I don't have on the screen. So just give me one moment.
And all the other participants, you're welcome to type your questions in chat, please. Or if you'd like to unmute and ask them, you're welcome to do so too. We're a small group.
Okay. Ooh, they're all still in a bit of a pile. Okay, so there's a number of different materials. I do have an example of each one up on the screen here. So on the left is your copyright exceptions sheet. So just like on the screen, here's the front of it. There's also a description on the back that goes through the different Creative Commons licenses, which is the pink card, which I'll talk about in just a moment. So it's kind of a double-sided. With this particular sheet, I have it as a consumable. So if the participant wants to take this with them, they can. If they don't want to, I'll just take it back and use it for another group. But I do let this one go if anyone wants to take it, because it's a really great informative sheet. The rest of the materials, though, do need to remain behind. The researcher card is a role card. And so there are 4 different roles, and I'm just going to pull them up. So we have researcher, creator, student, and teacher. And so those are 4 roles, and the purpose of them is to essentially just prompt different discussion points from different roles. So it is a role-playing game in that regard. I do encourage participants as well, if they would like to get into their character, they are more than welcome to. Obviously, that depends on their comfort level. I have sometimes people that get super into it and some that don't, and that's completely fine. It's whatever they want to do. But each card, so for example, here's a student card, a teacher card, and a creator card, and then the researcher is just up on the screen, but also here. So all of these cards you can see are green. So they indicate that this is a role card. And then on the back of them, each role is assigned a certain color. So your student is pink, your teacher is orange, your creator is blue, and your researcher is green. So double green for the researcher. So these role cards, each participant will receive one of these, and they will be assigned this role. So they will become this person throughout the game. And so essentially the role card just gives you a description about who you are, what you're studying, what your interests are, and gives you a bit of context, again, if you wanted to do the role-playing aspect of it. So for example, this creator, this card here, their description is you are a new author and you're very careful about how your work is used. And then to give more context to the person, their favorite animal is an elephant, their favorite vacation spot is Mexico, their interest is volunteering, and their guilty pleasure is writing fan fiction. So this, of course, as far as the adaptation is concerned, this can be anything that you would want, whatever is, interesting, relevant to you or the group that you're presenting to. And then each one of these has that information, again, just to kind of give it more context. So each participant gets one of those, and then they also get a task card. So that is the orange one there. So here is a creator task card, and then student, researcher, and teacher all have one as well. And so task 1 is associated to phase 1 of the game, and task 2 is associated to phase 2 of the game. Phase 1 being the creation stage, and task 2, phase 2 being the discussion stage. And so as far as the flow goes of the overall game, I do my copyright blurb 5-10 minutes at the beginning. We go over the instructions of the game. And then the people that are creators, they do need to do their sculpture first. So this isn't super clear in the instructions of the game. So this, I definitely just want to verbalize that they would need to do their creations first, because the researcher, student, and teacher, their task 1 will depend on what the creator has made. So that's just as far as the overall flow, that's just important to note. And so, for example, this creator, they've been given a task to create an imaginary creature entirely from their own imagination. And it says, be as creative as you'd like with this task. So they'll create some sort of weird monster or animal or whatever it may be. And then once the creators are done making their sculptures, the users, researcher, teacher, student, can pick a creator to copy off of or to adapt from or what have you. Each person will also have a license card. Let me just grab a couple examples. So these are going to be Creative Commons licenses, except for some all rights reserved cards. So meaning that just, full copyright, there's no open license associated with it. But each person will have this, and this will represent how they've distributed their work. So it's essentially saying, if they have put their sculpture online, they would distribute it under one of these conditions. And so that just gives a bit more context and discussion points, also bringing in what you can and can't do within a Creative Commons license. You can choose to include these or not. It's completely up to you, but this just, again, adds a bit of an extra layer to the game, and it gives you the chance to talk about licensing as well. And then finally, again, during task 2 or during the discussion phase, once one participant has kind of given their story as to what they did, every participant will have a voting card that you can say either okay or not okay in terms of copyright. And so everyone would just hold up a voting card, and then they would have to kind of explain why they voted that way. And then once that discussion's over, and if it's going for too long, you as the facilitator will just kind of have to monitor that. But once that discussion wraps up, then you move on to the next participant, who will give their story as to why they copied or why they didn't. And then again, your participants will vote. And then you essentially just go from there, going person to person. And then once the last person has gone, you wrap it up. You have, any sort of last thoughts, any last points, and then you wrap it up from there. And obviously you can choose to how you wrap it up. I typically just, say anything, ask people what they've learned from this, or if there's anything new they've learned. And often it has prompted a lot of really good discussion after the fact. And I've made really good connections with the rest of my campus through this game, because now we have a contact that I might not have had before. So if I missed anything in there, please let me know, but that's kind of an overview of all the cards and materials. And if anyone has any other specific questions about it, please feel free to ask.
So in terms of navigating, like actually implementing the game, when you have these researcher, student, creator, and the license card, which ones have you used most? Because you have so many deck of cards. Which one have you used? What is it that's really exciting, what students find exciting? Because there are so many scenarios, right? There are so many copyright cases. And even in terms of like Creative Commons licenses, there are so many of them, like whether it's public domain, the role card or the in particular the task card, which ones you find personally, as a game facilitator that you find exciting, and you find and even which ones you find students find exciting, because the researchers, they may find something else exciting or more relevant, meaningful.
Yeah, that's a great question. I'm just going through mine right now. So this is another piece. If you have a bunch of cards, I'm just going through them right now. If you have a bunch of cards like this, you can either choose them at random. You can just kind of put them in a pile, do it blind, and just, randomly match a role, a task, and a license together. That is something that is an option, but I tend to pick them and match them up with some purpose behind it, in the sense that I want to have, I guess, like a number of diverse tasks for people to do. So not everyone's doing the same thing, so we just end up having the same conversation. So for example, there's, I'm just looking through them. The student one, this is always the one that I find interesting. Is this it? No, I can't. I don't know if I'll be able to find it right off the hop, but there's one particular student task card that basically says something like, you're writing something for your final dissertation, and you really wanted to use this particular model that one of the creators has put up online. You ask your instructor about using it, and they say no because they're worried about the copyright implications, and so you find something else to use. And so that one in particular is something that like really encapsulates the copyright anxiety and copyright chill that people feel in these types of scenarios. And so because the discussion typically leads to, okay, well, did fair dealing apply here? Was it under an open license? Like, could you have asked for permission? And it opens up a lot of options that you can explore. And of course, we have that discussion within the context of the game, but then it also helps kind of bridge that, because this is a very common scenario that happens all the time. So as far as the tasks are concerned, the original developers of the game who made the tasks have done a very good job at choosing things that happen, often or are common use cases in real life. This is another one. So this is from the teacher one. There's a task that you as a teacher are creating course material for an open educational platform. So you're making an OER. And a creator has the perfect model for the visual you need. Create a model that is an exact copy of their work so that you can include a photograph of it in your materials. It's going to be made open after all. And so there's some considerations there as to how that particular creator has distributed their work. Would you follow the terms of a license if they have an open license? Could you potentially rely on fair dealing in that scenario? And then again, it allows for some exploring those various options through these discussion points. I do notice too that in the first, typically depending on the group, but in the first few discussion points, most people will not always, but often vote no, in the sense that if there's something where somebody has copied something, if there's even just the act of copying, they will immediately vote not okay, because there is this perception around that just the act of copying without consideration for anything else is copyright infringement. And so that seems to be most people's gut reaction. So it's kind of interesting to see as the conversations go along that their perceptions tend to change as they go in and they kind of realize that there are other options, and it may be copyright infringement, but it may not be. And so I like to see that kind of evolution as a facilitator, as you bring in, again, more and more voices and more people contribute to the conversation.
Taylor, thank you so much. You mentioned a very good point, evaluation, like evolution. We as librarians, or you as a copyright professional, We are also changing, we are growing with the profession, or you're getting more experience doing more tasks. So how would this evolve? What would be your next step? What challenges do you want to take, or new projects, initiatives you want to build on, with this experience you have built on for yourself? Are you going to create games?
I would like to. I was actually making a joke with someone this morning about the original creators of this game, and saying I would love to like pick their brains every day, because they've made some pretty cool stuff. On a personal note, I love board games, card games, video games, etc. It's a personal passion of mine, not so much on the development, more on the playing, but regardless, I think it's a very interesting field, and it's something that I would like to do and make my own games for specific copyright topics as well. I think it's very, very interesting. Kind of on the horizon in my professional practice right now is again, as I mentioned, the kind of much more targeted approach to copyright DOE, hopefully bringing it to departments around my institution. But I'm also attempting to kind of comprise and organize a copyright literacy strategy here. So I'm basing it off of the work of Chris Morrison. So he's one of the leaders of UK copyright literacy. He and a group had developed a copyright literacy strategy at the University of Kent in the UK. And so I've been looking at that particular document and just trying to think up some ideas as to how we can kind of implement these pieces into my own institution. And even if it doesn't become something like an official strategy document, perhaps it's, just ideas of how to increase copyright literacy and just different ways in which you can increase it. And so that's kind of my goal for this year and years to come. And then, of course, to do so would be to gamify and to have more interactive opportunities for various MRU community members.
Taylor, is this game available in an online format, or is it just like a board game? Like you need actual cards to shuffle?
I haven't tried online, I will say. Like I'm not saying it's impossible. I think you could do it online, but I think it'd be one of those things that you would have to prepare the digital cards ahead of time, and you would have to distribute them like as files to your participants. It might just be tricky to manage it. I personally because I agree. I think having an online option would be very nice. It's tricky with like discussion based workshops where when we're in online spaces, sometimes it can be kind of hard to have a group discussion. So I don't think it's impossible. I just think it would come with a different set of challenges. I did try, and this was a bit of a mess. I mean, it did work out, but I did try. The first time I taught, we were kind of in and out of lockdowns, and it was a time that we weren't there in person, but I had a number of students that couldn't come to campus, and so I did try a hybrid version of it. It was a lot of work to try and manage that. I also didn't, unfortunately, in the classroom I was in, I didn't have the technology needs that I would have required to kind of facilitate it in a bit more of a smoother way. But again, I don't think it's impossible. I just think it's a different set of challenges. I would recommend in person whenever possible, but if online's the only option you have, then it will just take a bit more planning ahead of time and ensuring that everyone has those materials. And perhaps it's just sending out an email to your participants, like, here's the image files you'll need for this workshop, come prepared to discuss, etc. But again, I haven't done a full online version myself.